realized a couple things I'd forgotten there, so I had to finish that up. So we're a couple minutes late starting, but I'm sorry.
We're good.
Thank you. And truth is, we were really just waiting for Lourdes to get
Yeah,
here.
that's
So.
true.
No, not true. All right. Well, I got 4 people with me, so I'm excited to get to teach today to you guys. Here's what we're gonna do though, and I realized, so first thing I'm gonna do here is throw up into the chat box.
Don't throw up.
Yeah, I'm gonna put up here in the chat box, how's that? I realized I forgot to send out the papers that we're gonna use today.
I know.
So I'll put them in the chat box there, but I'll also show it on the screen so you'll be able to see it. And those that are here in person, I'll give you a copy. So see, there are advantages to
Oh,
showing
wow.
up in
That's
person.
true. You're missing
There are
guys.
fun prizes.
Fun prizes, that's
Well,
right.
Thank you. This is quick email.
All right. Oh, what happened here?
Broke it.
I think I did actually.
Oh, no.
You
Oh,
break it,
yeah,
you buy it.
one
Is that what I'm
size
saying?
of it. Roll it back and the
That's
problem
what I'm
sometimes.
thinking.
Yes.
All right. Anyway, for you guys that are online, if you will put into the chat box your first and last name and your license number, if you haven't already, you've done that before. If you'll do that, that would be appreciated. I'm gonna roll the screen up here. Sorry, I'm having all kinds of technical issues today for this class, but we're gonna get it going here shortly. I don't know what happened there, but something is messed up with the screen. Let's see if rolling it back up fixes it here. I don't think it's going to.
Oh, wow.
Oh, well. It'll work. All right, so we're gonna just basically do the same kind of a thing that we did the other day, which is just gonna go through the buyer paperwork to make sure you guys understand it and that we know what we're dealing with and that we can explain it and all those kinds of things. So, all right, let me get it pulled up on the screen. Any questions or anything before I do that?
I guess I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is this packet everything we should do like this? Basically, we should do all this at the same time that we sign the buyer broker agreement?
Great question. Okay, so
Or some of them, it's like after once you're under contract?
yeah, so just making sure you guys online heard what he had said. So what Swen was asking is, should all of this paperwork that's in here be done when you first have the buyer sign your buyer broker? And the answer to that is kind of just depends. I mean, you could do it at that time, or you potentially could even just say some of it you're not going to. So for me, really, what it more boils down to for me is going to be, it depends on the person and the relationship that I have with that potential buyer is going to define a little bit of that, of how far I go with it. So you don't have to, I guess, is at the end of the day, the answer, but it may make sense to some of it. So, but as we go through, let's see what you think as we do that. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, so let me make sure that you guys, I guess you guys don't technically need this up, but I'm gonna pull it up anyway. Yeah, something's definitely messed up on this screen here. I don't know. Okay, here we go. So just pointing out what we did the first time, reinforcing what I had said to you guys, is that this is a legally binding agreement. So you'll notice up here at the top on that it shows this is a legally binding agreement. Read carefully before signing. So same type of thing. Man, that screen is bugging me. It's like, I don't know why, how it's gotten so.
Just grab onto the top and then put your feet at the bottom and let it just hang and see if it's holding.
Yeah, right. Okay. So All right, here we go. Sorry, I've just been distracted, as you can tell, and so I got to get back into the zone here.
It's
So-
not bothering us.
Okay,
It'll
good.
be okay.
It's bugging me, but I'm gonna
It'll
let
be
it go.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Ed. Okay, here we go. So this exclusive buyer broker agreement between Century 21, Everest, and then blank, we're gonna put in the buyer. So now I had asked you guys last time, where do we get to put in the name for the seller? But so this time what I'm asking is, okay, so what do we do in terms of putting in our buyer's name there? Where do we get it?
Where we get it?
Yeah, and that might seem like a little bit of like a duh question, but there's more to it. So there's reason I'm asking it.
I
So
would say anything like their legal name, like if it's on a license or something, just to make sure it matches.
okay, so someone's saying that something from their legal name that off of a driver's license to make sure that it matches. Okay, any other thoughts? How Lourdes, how do you do it? How do you figure out what you're gonna
I
put?
usually make sure that who is going to buy, if it's going to be one or two joint account, whatever, to make sure, because we need to have both to be able to, if they're going to qualify for the loan. And then of course, like he says, we need to make sure it's a legal name, exactly how it is in their license or legal documents or passport.
Okay, anybody on Zoom and do anything differently than that?
Yes, they could also be purchasing it as a trust or as an LLC, so it could be in the name of an entity.
Okay, good. Yeah, so here's how I always approach it. So here's how I want you to think about it. Is for me, if they are getting a loan, now if they're not getting a loan, then they can put whatever they want on there. But if they're going to be getting a loan on the property, I want to put on here the name, how it is going to appear on the loan. Now, here's the truth though. On the buyer broker, probably doesn't really matter that you have the exact name of how it's going to be on the loan. But since most of us are either using a dot loop or a DocuSign to get signatures, basically whatever name you put on there is what's going to go on the real estate purchase contract. The underwriter is, now they haven't been as sticky on this currently as they were back in 2010, 11, 12, but a lot of times they will want the name on the purchase contract to match how they applied for the loan. So if they did first name, middle name, and last name on the loan, that's what we want to put on. So when we get to this part of it, I always just say the best thing to do is to find out, if you don't already know, find out if they have applied for the loan. And if they have, do they have a pre-approval letter? And if they do, that pre-approval letter should have the name of how it's going to appear on the loan. That's what I want to put in here for the buyer. Make sense? Okay, good. All right, next. So the terms, yeah, go ahead.
When you said if they're gonna pay cash for it, they can put whatever they want.
Mhm.
That's not literal, right?
No, well,
They
I
can
mean,
put Mickey Mouse.
well, yeah, probably you could, I guess, put Mickey Mouse, but yeah, typically the title company's probably going to want to see, but they're less worried about it, I guess I would
Yeah.
say. The title company is now when they're buying. So when you're buying, if you're buying the property, the title company probably, and I've never asked, but potentially if you said, I want to, the name I want this to be titled in is Mickey Mouse, they probably would, they would advise you
The
against it,
problem
but
comes after.
I don't know that there's anything to stop you from doing that.
Interesting.
The downside to doing it though is when it comes time to sell, they're going to want proof that that's who you are.
Right.
So if you did it, put it Mickey Mouse, that property
Mouse
might
will keep
never
it.
get, yeah, Mickey Mouse is going to keep it. So yeah, so to some extent, if you were buying it though, and you said, I want it to be in the name of Ed instead of Edward, they would go, okay, like, that's fine. So, all right. Next, so the terms of the agreement. So the next section here, the blank line has, that it's between Century 21, the company, and the buyer's agent, which obviously this one you're going to put your name in as the buyer's agent. So you'll put your name in there, right? Okay. And then for that it's effective on the date it's signed and ends at 5 p.m. on blank date of month of year. So how far out should we put a buyer broker? So how many months should we put this as?
6.
Okay, so I hear a 6. Any other thoughts?
Depends on them, I guess, the price, if it's a house over, $1 million or so, I think maybe like a year or so. So it
Okay,
depends.
so Lourdes is saying on a higher price property, you might want to do
Longer.
a longer time. Okay. What were you saying, Swin?
I said, I just did one and I just put 4 because I just didn't know. I was just like.
Okay, put 4. Yeah, so here's what I would say is to some extent, keep in mind that the reason we give you the option of putting it in there is because there's not really necessarily a right answer. Otherwise, we would just have it say ending 6 months from the date this is signed.
Right.
But generally, that's the answer that people will give to me is that they will say 6 months.
Mhm.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And here's how I usually do it though. For me, when I get to this section, I usually will just ask the buyer, so how soon do you need to be into a home? And if they told me I want to be in a home next month, then I'm probably going to put this out 2 or 3 months. If they said we want to be in a home in the next 3 months, then I might put 4 or 5 or 6 months. So for me, now here's why. Why would I do it that way rather than just say 6 months? Or I've seen some agents that they just automatically put a year on there. So you're committed for a year. What could be the downside to that?
Well, it gives them a feeling of how aggressive you're gonna be and how attentive you're being to their schedule. If
Okay.
you're stretching it out too far, they think you're gonna, lay back and take it
Okay.
easy.
Good.
Speed things, it's big things.
Good. So they may think that you're not as aggressive. Okay, good. Why else could it be? Any other reasons?
What's the question?
So why could it be a downside to put it for a year?
Oh,
What could be?
Kind of makes it look like you're incapable of doing it quicker. I don't
Okay,
know.
okay.
That's how I look at it, like, what, you can't do this in a few months?
Okay,
You need a
good.
whole year to find me something?
You're establishing a fiduciary responsibility to this person. And if you don't want it to span that long, you don't want it to
Good.
span that long.
Good. That's kind of where I was going with it is what you guys have said is right. But the bigger thing for me is at the end of the day, when you enter into this with somebody, you're now entering into fiduciary duties. All of those fiduciary duties you now owe to this client, so the one that I always like to bring up in this scenario is obedience, right? We have a fiduciary duty of obedience to our client. So if they've signed this with me and they want to go see properties, what do I have to do?
Show them your properties.
And what if they go look at 10, 12 properties and then don't write an offer? And then the next week want to go look at 10 properties and don't write offers. And for the next year,
You're fine.
you get to go drive around and show them property.
You
So
get the showings.
yeah, now, so here's the other reason I bring that up is just, this is a legally binding agreement, right? We'd already talked about that. And it takes 2 signatures to enter into it. The buyer's got to sign it, and then we sign it on behalf of the company. You sign it on behalf of the company, which now means in order to get out of this contract, how many signatures do we need?
2.
That's right. They have to agree to get out, and we have to agree to get out of it. Otherwise, you owe now those fiduciary duties to the people. Now, with that being said, though, does it happen that people would sign this for a year and then, so let me ask it this way. How are you going to handle it is, so let me, Swin, I'm going to throw out a scenario for you, okay? Tell me how you're going to handle it.
Okay.
You get it, you come across, you go to lunch today, you go to Chick-fil-A, we'll say. You're at Chick-fil-A and you're in line to order and you hear the person in front of you talking to their friend and they say, yeah, we're pretty frustrated. We really want to get a house, but we're having a hard time and we, just really struggling. So are you just going to order your meal or are you going to talk to the person about real estate?
Oh, I would talk to him for sure. You'd probably be wearing this,
Okay.
just because if I want to wear, it makes me stand out a little bit. And I
So
think
for you guys on Zoom, he has a name tag on is what he's saying. Can you guys hear him okay,
It
by the
says
way, or do I need to
section 1.
repeat what he's saying?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay.
Um,
If you ever need me to repeat, just tell me to repeat. So, okay, go ahead.
And then for sure, I would talk to him about it. I would ask, have you been working with an agent? If not.
Okay, good. So
Talk about
okay,
benefits.
so hold on. He's going right where I wanted him to go. So now we're gonna now have a discussion that is probably a little bit different than maybe what you were trained when you went over to the board. And when I say a little bit different, I'm just gonna clarify a few things that they didn't potentially clarify to you guys, okay? When you did your orientation at the board and code of ethics, okay? So, you said you would ask them if they're working with an agent. Now, why? Why would you ask them if they're working with an agent?
Because I don't think we're supposed to, like, I mean, as far as I know.
Step in, if somebody.
I'm trying to think
else's
of the
contract.
words for it, yeah, if they're working for another agent,
Okay, good. So
go in.
Swen's saying if they're working with an agent, he doesn't want to interfere with that agency,
yeah.
which is 100% correct, by the way.
Oh, you know what I will say actually, because one thing is you work with an agent and they haven't even signed a contract, so the first thing that you should
Okay,
actually ask is.
so hold
have you
that,
signed a
hold that
contract?
thought for a minute, okay? Hold on. So, okay, so you're gonna find out if they're working with an agent because you don't want to violate our code of ethics, right?
Yeah.
So let me first explain what our code of ethics actually says. What our code of ethics says is that you need to ask, so this goes to where you were saying, Lourdes, you need to ask them if they are working with an agent or if they've signed a buyer broker agreement before providing a substantive service. So before you provide somebody with a substantive service is when we have to ask. Then it has in parentheses some examples. And it says writing an offer or presenting a CMA. So technically, based upon that, we don't have, so I'm gonna kind of talk out of two sides on this. I'm gonna be at one extreme for a minute and I'll be at the other extreme for a minute. And so and then I'll let you guys decide kind of where you're gonna fall on this. But our code of ethics says that you have to ask prior to providing a substantive service. So you don't have to, so standing in line at Chick-fil-A, you don't have to ask, are you working with an agent? Now, typically the way the board trains it is that you should ask, and you should ask right away. You should ask, as soon as you can. Now, and I understand the reasoning behind that because yeah, we shouldn't be interfering with somebody. Okay. So we're going to keep this scenario going and you guys tell me what you think. Go ahead.
Well, we're also not supposed to start bad mouthing anybody else's work either.
For sure.
Because we don't know the situation, and if we start ruining the integrity of the industry, we're gonna be in.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, do you have to necessarily badmouth them to?
No.
I mean, I wouldn't think you'd have to. I mean, you'd be like, man, some people, this market's crazy. Some people are so busy.
Okay, so yeah, so let's continue our role play, okay? So I'm now standing there talking to Chad as we're ordering and assuming I'm not an agent and neither's Chad and I'm saying, yeah, we're just frustrated. We're really struggling on getting a property and we don't know what we're gonna do. So what do you?
So I would still, I mean, current brain,
Okay, that's fine.
Would think, okay, I'm gonna
Just do current you and then we'll talk about it.
Would definitely inside be thinking offer my services, but just mention that.
Okay, we'll do it. We're role playing it. Okay, so I'm standing here in line. You're behind me.
Okay, I hear you say.
Yep, we're frustrated. We're trying to get a property. It's just not working.
I'd probably say, yeah, it's gonna be hard out there. The market's crazy. There's so many people out there buying and not enough realtors to help everyone out.
Okay.
And then, I mean, depending on the response, I don't know if that's a good response or a good thing to say or not, but.
Okay, well, you said you were going to offer your services. When are you
Yeah,
going
I'd say, I mean, I'm a realtor. One thing, I help people buy homes all the time. It's something I specialize in.
Okay.
If you're interested, I mean, have you worked with a realtor before?
Yeah, but we're frustrated with him.
You are?
Yeah.
Did you ever sign a contract with them or anything, or just like verbal,
Well,
situation?
I don't know if we did or not, but I mean, we've written a couple offers on houses, but.
Oh.
So if you've written a couple offers, then you probably have an agreement signed.
Yeah, the hard part is like, he doesn't ever call us back though. Like I haven't talked to him for probably a month. Like I keep trying to, hey, can you get us a property? And
Yeah.
I never hear back from him.
My jaw's dropping at that point.
Yeah, that can be pretty frustrating sometimes. Sometimes some agents are just so busy they don't know how to reach out and ask for help from other agents to help a client. That's one of the things I do. If I get busy, I'm going to have somebody else help you as much as I'm not.
Well, so can you help me?
I can. think. Legally, I don't know.
Okay, good. So this is where I want to go with it. Go ahead.
Do you mind if I give feedback?
Sure.
I think you're being really timid. You're a little bit afraid of that situation. It
Well,
looks
part
like.
of it is because he doesn't know the right answer.
Yeah,
is
I
what
don't know
is
the
where
right
we're
answer,
at.
right? I
So-
don't know, because I don't want to,
We
Like-
won't prosecute you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
I can-
Go for it.
Yeah, it's
My
good.
thought process
Mike,
right
I'm just
now-
telling you, it's a little timid right
my
now.
thought
so-
process right now would be, oh, I could do a whole shit ton of work with this person and then get nothing because all of a sudden he has a signed document, they come
Okay,
after
good.
me and I
So-
get nothing.
Perfect. He's gone right where I want to go with this. So, but I'm going to actually hold for just a minute here. So here's the key thing that for right now. I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. When we get to section 2, I'm going to come back to this conversation, but I'm going to put it on hold for just a minute. Here's the key thing. There's two different pieces to this. There is procuring cause, there's who's going to get paid, and then there's this contract. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. But so here's the thing. Part of just what I want you to remember for right now is what we're talking about here is that we're going to put in a date in which we now owe these fiduciary duties to this buyer during that time. So let me ask you, if that scenario we created, the buyer is saying, I'm frustrated with my agent, they're not calling back. Is the agent doing their fiduciary duties?
No.
No. Does that change the fact that they have a contract though? No.
No.
So can you keep that in mind and we'll come back to it. All right, so let's finish off this section 1 and then I'm going to come back to this scenario, okay? All right, so it's going to be in effect until the date we put in there or the closing or acquisition of a property, and then it has that whichever occurs first. So it's either that date or the closing of a property is what's going to end this contract. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Just because they sign it for a year, if they bought a house next week, this contract is now over because they purchased on a property, even though you signed it for a year, okay? But then it also says for the acquisition of a property, or whichever occurs first, in, and then it has blank county or located at blank, where you could put in an address. So here's the idea of this. And actually, let me tell you a quick scenario that I saw recently. So we had an agent that, and I can't remember if the first agent was with our company or not. I don't think it was. But an agent no, it wasn't. In fact, I remember what company it was. But an agent had signed a buyer broker with their client, but they signed it only for Salt Lake County. Well, the buyers now are frustrated with their agent and so frustrated to the point that they contacted one of our agents. One of our agents, in talking to them, finds out, yes, we've signed a buyer broker, but we only signed it for Utah County. Could we use you to buy, or not Utah County, Salt Lake County? Could we use you to buy in either Davis or Utah County? So what's the answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the agent said, yeah, I can help you with that. And in fact, what the agent did is even called up the other agent and said, hey, I know you're working with these people. You've got an agreement signed with them for any properties they buy in Salt Lake County, but they've asked me to help them in Utah and Davis County. And I just wanted to give you the heads up that that's taking place. And the agent said, okay. And ultimately the buyers just said, we don't want to use that agent and we want to not use that agent so bad, we will not buy in Salt Lake County just to avoid.
Oh, man, he must
There
have
we
been
go.
rough.
There we go.
But then here's what happened. Do they really want to not, in that scenario, if somebody was looking in Salt Lake County, do they really probably not want to be in Salt Lake County because of an agent?
No.
No. So what ended up happening is that, yes, they start looking in Utah County. And so they were looking in Saratoga Springs and stuff, but they also then kind of got to the point where they were like, yeah,
Nothing.
we don't really want to be, we'd rather be in Salt Lake. Is there a way we can work this out? What do we need to do? So anyway, here's my point in this is in this scenario, if you're putting in a county in there, then that's the county that this contract is for. If they wanted to go buy something else, they're not. Now, here's the other side of it though. There are since most of you guys on here are newer agents, I want you to understand most agents do not get this agreement signed until they write an offer. That's just the way most agents work it. So just because somebody's out looking at properties with somebody else does not mean they have signed a buyer broker. In fact, I will tell you that there is, it is probably, and I'm making up this number, but I'll bet you there's less than a 2% chance. I'll bet less than 2% of the agents get one of these signed before writing an offer.
Why are they afraid to ask to?
Yes. People are afraid to ask their buyer to sign this because they're afraid the buyer's going to go, well, I don't want to commit to anything with you. And so they're afraid to do it. And I don't know, I don't think we have anybody from California on. We probably don't because we're talking about Utah. But here's what I'll tell you. I'll bet it's 1% of the agents in California that will ask for it. They're more afraid of it in California than we are in Utah even. But so just know, just because somebody says they've got an agent showing them properties doesn't mean they have signed this. So
Unless they put, I put in my contract any.
any county, okay, that
And
works.
then I leave,
Could
of
you
course,
just put
blank
NA?
that part for the address.
Or do you have to put something?
If you put NA, you're basically saying if they buy a property that's not applicable. Like I would say you need to put a county. So Lourdes says she puts any in there. You could put all Utah counties or something, but.
Okay, because I just did one, I put any, because I was like, I don't know which, so I should probably have them re-sign it.
Well, so here's the flip side of this. So, and this is part of the discussion I want to have. Let me say one other thing first. The other option is you can put located at. So here's what I was going to say is so many agents are afraid to get this signed, but technically we should have this signed before we ever go show any properties. And so just know for me, the thing I like about our contract is that it has or located at a minimum, I would say ask people to sign it at least for the properties you're going to go show them. So even if somebody was afraid to sign it, if you had a buyer that was like, I don't think I want to sign that, I would at least say, well, we're going to go look at these 3 properties. I need you to sign this at least for those 3 properties. And you could list those on here. And granted, you don't have enough room on that line, but you could do an addendum to it and say, put on here, see addendum, and put on there properties located at. Here's my question for you. If somebody's not willing to agree to this for at least the 3 properties you're going to go show them that day, should that be a red flag?
Yeah, I wouldn't think they're worth my time.
Yeah, that's just it.
Or I didn't do my job well enough to make them comfortable with working with me.
Yeah, one of the 2. Okay.
It's for their benefit too, though. I mean, because let's say you go see a couple properties and you start to have conversations with the other realtor. If you don't have this in place, you don't really have any confidentiality agreements with your client or anything. So it's in their best interest for you to have this in place so that you can act as their agent.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly right. So just kind of know, for me, I think at a minimum, get people to sign it for the properties. And again, there's nothing right. I'm not sure if you guys have thought this way, but remember, we got a blank line here. I could write in that this is going to expire next week. I could put that the agreement expires next week. So to me, if you get somebody who's afraid of signing it, you can always just say, well, let me just have you sign it for 2 weeks. And then at the end of 2 weeks, if you feel like we aren't working well together, then we won't extend it. But if you feel good about it after 2 weeks, that I'm doing a good job, we can extend it. So
To an extent, you just do an addendum to it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep. So that's where I would just say, don't be so afraid of this, is what most agents in the industry are. Like when I'm down in California and I start talking about this with our California agents, they're like, oh, I can't get that signed. Like, why? Now the difference in California, if you look at ours up here, ours says exclusive buyer broker agreement and agency disclosure. In California, there are 2 different documents. They have a buyer broker and then they have agency. So they don't have to have the buyer broker signed to do a deal. They have to have the agency agreement signed. And so because of that, that's why they're more afraid of having somebody sign a buyer broker, is because, but at the end of the day, don't be afraid of it, because here's the thing. Here's the truth about why we don't ask for it, is because we're afraid they're going to say, I might not use you, I might use somebody else. And we don't want to hear that. So because we don't want to hear it, we just tiptoe around it or don't talk about it at all. And then when they go and use somebody else, then we're all ticked off that they went and used somebody else. But, well, did you ask anyone to sign it? Now, so let me give you one example of that real quick. I'm on the professional standards committee for the UAR. I used to be on it for the Salt Lake Board, but I'm now on it for the Utah Association of Realtors. And when I was on the professional standards for the Salt Lake Board, we had a scenario where an agent came in saying, I should be entitled to this commission because I showed properties to these people and then they went and wrote an offer with somebody else. Well, part of what the guy said is why he felt like he was entitled to the commission is he went out and showed them properties and he asked them to sign this and they said no. And then he went out and showed them properties a second time, asked them to sign this. They said no. Went out a third time and showed them properties, asked them to sign this. They said no. Then they went and wrote an offer on a new construction that they had gone and seen. To some extent for me, I feel like in that scenario, if you ask somebody to sign this 3 times and they're telling you no, what are they telling you? They're not going to use you. So like you shouldn't be too surprised on it. So anyway, all right. So in terms of that section, just 1 up there, the terms of the agreement, we're going to put in for how long it is and where it is at. And don't be afraid to do a shorter term and then extend it out.
Real quick, should I literally go back and fix the one and have them re-sign one? If I put like NA for.
Oh, that was I don't think I finished saying this. Here's the other side of it. To some extent on this, now we talked last week about the seller exclusive right to represent, and that one is pretty heavily enforced, meaning almost every brokerage out there, if you tried to interfere on somebody's exclusive right to sell, you're going to hear about it. But on the buyer broker one, because of what we're going to talk about in just a minute, this doesn't tend to be as enforced. Now, that doesn't mean it's not remember we said it's a legally binding agreement, like it still is, but for whatever reason, brokerages are less likely to enforce this than others. And here's the other thing that I always think about with this. This document is only as good as the relationship that you have with your client.
That's the most important.
So to some extent, I would say, Swen, it depends on your relationship with that buyer. If they're committed to using you, you probably, technically, should you go fix it? Yes. Do you need to go fix it? I don't know. If they're committed to working with you, you probably would be fine if you just left it as NA and didn't do anything. So, okay, then you're fine. So, but technically, like, I guess why I say technically is if for some reason they wanted out of it, that could give them an out of your contract. To be able to say, well, he put NA, well, we didn't know what that meant, so we thought that meant it didn't apply to any of the counties.
So could you just locate that state of Utah?
Well, so the first one just says in blank county.
So you can't leave anyone blank.
Well, you'd have to just put in something, I guess. What I'm saying.
Just put any and you general
Any,
for
yeah, that
Davis,
makes sense.
Utah, and everything.
I like it.
Make it seem your life simple.
Yeah, because then it would say any county, Utah.
So you're fine, even though if they're saying Salt Lake,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
never know when the buyer is going to change their mind. So in order
Yeah,
for
because
you
they
to
may
be
find
able to
out
do
I
that,
can't get the house that I
done.
want in
Well,
Salt Lake, so I got to go to Tooele because I can afford it.
You never know.
With my buyer right now, I mean, they're pretty much the entire state of Utah is available.
Yeah,
Sure.
so there you go.
So yeah, you're safe doing that.
Okay, good. So the next piece of this. So section 2 then now goes to the brokerage fee. And it says that we will be entitled to 3% of the purchase price plus, and then this one says $495. So the minimum you need to do is a $295, but a lot of agents will do a $495 instead, and then you get to split the difference above the $295. So however you decide to do it, okay? But here's what I want you to understand on this. This brokerage fee, here's how I explain it to the client, especially in today's market with where things are at and the number of people on the MLS that are offering less than a 3%. This is a discussion that's crucial to have, is you want to be saying to your clients, okay, this agreement says that when you purchase, I will be owed a 3% commission. And how I explain it to them is I would say, for years, I always said, but really you don't have to worry because whoever we go to on the MLS is probably going to be offering 3%. And so it's fine. But it is becoming less and less people offering 3%. So I wouldn't have that discussion anymore. Today, I would have the discussion of this says it's going to be a 3% commission. There are going to be some properties we're going to see on the MLS that are offering less than a 3% commission. How do you want me to handle it as your agent? And they're probably going to say, well, I don't know. What do you mean? What are our choices? And then you can say, okay, here, what that means is this. If we see one that's offering 2%, this contract would say you would have to pay, I probably would say, you would have to pay the additional 1% of the commission. Or if you would like me to, I could call the agent and talk to the agent and say, my client is interested, but they are concerned because you're only offering 2% across the board. I'm going to be sending over escrow instructions asking you to pay an additional 1% towards that. Or the other option that you have is the buyer could ask the seller to pay that 1% on behalf of them. Now there's a fine line on this. So make sure if you guys that are on Zoom, if you're watching The Price is Right, pause it for a minute so while we talk about this, because you want to make sure you understand what we're talking about here is that if you're going to ask the seller to pay it on behalf of the buyer, it has to be worded properly. So make sure you either get with me or one of the brokers to find out how do I word this, because it is an ethics violation to discuss commissions in your contract. Meaning, so you can't write in there seller to pay a 3% BAC. That would be an ethics violation. But you can, the buyer can ask the seller to pay their brokerage fees on their behalf. So we have, and I don't remember the exact language right now off the top of my head, but we've got specific language that you want to use on that so that it's not an ethics violation.
I just want to clarify. I hear before that you cannot discuss this, commissions in addendums.
Correct. No commissions in an addendum.
Because we do have another escrow or something that will put some kind of restrictions to be able to, if we need to increase our commission or so, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you cannot discuss commissions anywhere in the contract. So just know that that is an ethics violation to do that. But it's not improper to ask for the buyer to ask the seller on an addendum to pay part of their brokerage fees, the fees that they owe to us. Okay. So to some extent, here's the point. You want to have the conversation of how do you want me to handle it? Do you want me to call and see if I can negotiate it up to 3%? But in the event, because here's the thing, there are some brokerages out there now that are offering, like I've seen they'd offered $1 to whoever brings in the buyer. So you got to ask your buyer, how do you want to handle that? What do you want me to do if we come across that scenario? What?
$1, why would you even write that in there?
Because they're saying that the buyer needs to pay your commission.
Yeah, essentially they're saying the buyer. Now, to some extent, we may get to the point that that's where this goes to, but just know when you get to this, what we want to be saying to the client is, in the event they're offering less than 3%, how do you want me to handle it? What do you want me to do? And we can ask the buyer to pay it for you. We can try to get the broker to up it. Now, in our current environment though, if you called up the other agent and said, hey, will you change the BAC up to 3% for my buyer? He's going to go, okay, yeah, I got 15 other offers that are not asking for that. So then in that scenario, we're going to either have to ask the seller to pay it as part of the offer, which could be a downside because now it's taking away from the net of what the seller is going to net. So the next option with that is going to be potentially going to the lender, asking the lender if they can bump the rate a little bit to then offset and pay that commissions for the buyer. Okay, so just know there's options out there, but that's what we have to do with this. Okay, so now, in addition to that on this brokerage fee, let's talk about this for a second. So let's gonna go back now to our scenario. I'm at Chick-fil-A, I'm the buyer. Swen says to me, I could help you and find some properties. Now remember, I'm the buyer. If I've already signed a buyer broker though, and I'm saying, yeah, I'm frustrated because my agent's not calling me back, can Swen go and help me? I see Lourdes shaking her head no, but not saying anything.
If that buyer still have a contract.
Well, I haven't even asked how long this contract was for, right?
Sometimes you don't even know what long the contract is, but
Okay.
I'll say don't even stick your nose there and unless the buyer needs to deal with the agent, and if nothing happened, you should be able to refer to go and talk to the broker, I guess,
Okay.
the company.
So what do the rest of you guys think? How about people on Zoom? What do you
I
think?
think she's right. I would recommend that. I'll let Zoom talk.
No, they appreciate you talking.
That's what I would do. I would recommend to them, hey, if you're really unhappy, talk with them about it, or talk with the brokerage and say, I'm not happy with the service our agent's providing. And then I'd give them my card, my name, blah, 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 is Swen Nielsen. I'd be happy to help you.
Okay, good.
I do
So
have
here's
a-
the thing.
I do have
Russ?
a, oops, go ahead.
But,
Adrian put in a really good question in the chat, if you could address
oh,
that.
okay.
Back talking about
Yeah, thank you.
PCs.
I'm not keeping an eye very well on the chat, so. So, Adrian, so let me see. Is there a way a buyer can sign to say, I'll only work with you, but on the outside chance something goes wrong with the commission, that I am not responsible to pay the commission? Yeah, you could do that, Adrian. Yeah, you would just put it in an addendum saying in the event that it's less than, that they wouldn't have to pay it. I'm not sure I would want to work with that buyer.
Yes. No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I kind of got the answer through what you said. But yes, you would put the terms in the addendum, but not any numbers in regarding commission in an addendum, right?
Say that again.
If they said, okay, when you verbally said, how would you like to handle this if the listing agent isn't offering any commission, you can put an addendum, saying that he doesn't want to pay any commission, but you wouldn't put any dollar amount or percentages on the addendum, right? Isn't that what you said? No commission talk in the addendum?
Oh, okay, yes. So just not on the real estate purchase contract. You could do it on an addendum to the buyer broker.
Oh, you can put it on
Yeah,
there.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
All right.
Yeah.
Sure,
it-
sure.
Yeah, on an addendum to the buyer broker, you can put commissions and all that, but just not on an addendum to the real estate purchase contract.
All right. So he can say, okay, this is how I'd like to handle it. I'd rather see if the seller will pay, or, but that when he signs that contract, he's definitely saying, okay, well, there's 3% I owe you for this service. And, he understands that, but you guys have to figure out how, whether or not would you make that arrangement before you showed the property? Would you say, okay, the seller's not going to pay?
Correct.
And you say, okay, look, this is not a property that I can show you.
Yeah, ultimately, that's the point of this is, what I want to do is I want to be able to have this conversation and stuff beforehand so that we know, hey, if we come across properties that look like this, how are we going to handle it? What are we going to do? And so that way you're not left kind of out there trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, they have to know there is a value, I mean, to your time but I mean, if they really are just not being, unethical or just plain old jerky, if they have no extra money, but what they have for their slim down payment, at least it's out in the open up front.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right.
And it's not
All
just
right.
you.
Thank
it's
you.
Brokerage, right? So I'm a member of a company. This is for the company.
Yep,
It's
it's the
not just
brokerage.
me
Yep.
being this way. It's
Yep,
our company
that's correct.
policy.
Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I just actually have a phone call yesterday when I was just leaving my office, and it's the referral from another friend, and he says, look, this house actually was listed for $785,000. He called me last night. He said, I'm frustrated with my agent. She doesn't do anything. She's taking a cruise. She's going to Italy. She's going to all these places, and she also has a job, a full-time job. And I said, so why did you pick her? And he goes, well, because my girlfriend told me to go ahead and just, she can be able to do the job. Anyway, the whole thing is totally frustrated. So the only thing I did is I told him that he needs to still to sit down with his agent and be able to figure out a way how she can be able to live more time with his behalf. And if it doesn't work, the only thing, probably the other way to do is just to go and talk to the broker. Now, if he said, I don't want to work with her, she's not doing anything. And so what is next?
Okay, good. This is exactly where I want to go. So thank you for bringing it up. So here's the thing. So here's what we're going to talk about for a minute is there's two pieces to this. There's, and I already mentioned this once, but there's procuring cause And then there's the legality of this contract that we have signed. Now, I talked about being on the professional standards committee at the board. As part of that, part of what we would do is we would listen to we would do arbitration basically between agents. So let's use yours. We'll forget the scenario with Swin. This is
a
better.
real one.
So yeah, this is real. So with Lourdes, so this guy, let me make sure everybody online gets it. You got a call from a potential buyer.
From the seller.
Oh, a seller.
He's the seller.
Oh,
Actually, I'm
well,
sorry.
seller's gonna be different. Let's pretend it's a buyer.
Okay.
Because with a seller, it's gonna be harder to do what I was about to say. But with a seller, with a buyer that calls and so let's just say you get a call from a friend, whoever, just somebody calls off a listing, the sign that you got, doesn't matter. And they say to you, I'm frustrated with my agent. They don't call me back. They're on, I mean, when you said they're on cruises,
Yeah.
that right now I'd be like, okay, they're lying because I don't think there's any cruises happening right now. But okay, but let's say it's another time. And they said they're gone on cruises, they're traveling the country or the world, whatever, and that they are never available. They won't help me. I'm not using them anymore.
Yeah.
Then ultimately, yes, the best scenario is that they go and get this canceled. But you can't tell them that.
Right.
So the only thing you can tell them is you have rights as a consumer. Go talk to the broker. You could call the division. You could call the board. Like you can point them to other people. You can't tell them how to get out of it. Okay. Now, but let's just say though, because this happens too. Let's say that buyer, even though it's a seller, we're going to pretend it's a buyer. Let's say that buyer says to you, okay, and they hang up, and then the next day they call you and go, okay, I got it canceled. Okay, great. So now Lourdes goes out and starts showing properties to this buyer. They go find a home, you write an offer, you're under contract, and somehow this other agent finds out about it and calls you and says, hey, Lourdes, this is Russ. I have a buyer broker signed with that client that you wrote the offer with. So I just want to let you know I'm entitled to the commission. So Lourdes said, I'm in trouble. But is she in trouble?
All depends.
So it kind of depends. So here's the key thing on this. Is that, remember, there's two different pieces. There's who's going to get paid, and then there's this contract. And actually, there's a third piece to it, because then there's our code of ethics as well. But so it is possible that what happens, so how procuring cause works is going to be an uninterrupted chain of events. And I love the way that the Arkansas Supreme Court defined it this way. It's not the squirrel that gathered the nut, but the one that shook the tree. So the squirrel that shakes the tree is entitled to the nut, not the one that went and gathered it. Okay. So that's how the Arkansas Supreme Court defines procuring cause, which of course Arkansas is going to define it that way, right? But here's the thing. Lourdes could get paid on that because did Lourdes do anything wrong? I guess let me first say it that way.
No, I mean, I guess she would just take the guy's word for it. Because I mean, anybody could call and be like, yeah, just talk to him 5 minutes, let it go, and it's good. But maybe he didn't even talk to him. Do you know?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is that's what happened. Is he never called and talked to him?
Yeah.
He just called Lourdes back and said, nope, yeah, we're good.
So I mean, if it was me, I'd want some kind of proof or you know.
This is what I can't remember the form, but I need to see whatever you done. And there's another form which actually is a cancellation or withdrawal. I can't remember, where it says that the previous agent won't need to go
so
after.
That would be the ideal.
I really like that.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I guess here's kind of my point for you guys. You decide where you fall on the spectrum of this. Are you just going to trust them if they call you and say it? Like you could.
I don't.
But here's the other side of this is that you do run the risk that they could file an ethics complaint against you saying you knew that they had this buyer broker and you went out and showed them properties. But that doesn't mean you're not going to get paid still. So I want to make sure you guys understand, you could do that and still get paid, but you also still run the risk of that. And then there's the other side of this is this. This contract remember, this is a legally binding contract. We keep talking about that. So if they had signed that, the other broker could go to them because it says if you buy a property in Salt Lake County, you owe me a commission. And they could go to court saying, you owe me a commission, and they would technically probably end up owing them a commission. Now, would a judge award it to them? I don't know, but they could be owed that the buyer would now have to pay a commission on this. And Lourdes said double, but kind of maybe double, because they didn't really pay the first one if it was a 3% on the MLS. So this is the part though where I was saying very, very few times does that get enforced. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's pretty rare that somebody goes to court to enforce a buyer broker and get them to pay. When I've sat on these arbitration things, and there are scenarios where you can see, I have sat on them where I've seen neither agent did anything wrong, and we've awarded the commission to one of the parties because of procuring costs. Back to who shook the tree, not who gathered the nut. So think of it this way, is just having a buyer broker sign, I'm turning this all of a sudden into a code of ethics class, not intentionally, but to some extent, the buyer broker is a link in the chain, but it's only a link in the chain. We a lot of times as agents think, you may have heard to and through. Well, who took them to and through the property? That's only a piece of it as well. That's a piece of it. The buyer broker's a piece of it. The fact of, if the buyer shows up and said what Lourdes told me, I could never get a hold of my agent. They didn't return my calls. They didn't. To some extent, that panel looks at it and goes, well, yeah, what else were they supposed to do? They couldn't not go buy a house because they can't get a hold of their agent. So here's my point, is just know when you get into those scenarios, because they do show up, that recognize to some extent, like depending on, unless you just flat out say, nope, I'm not working with you until you can provide proof that you got out of it. But sometimes buyers lie. I guess that's probably the way to say it. Sometimes you may ask somebody, are you working with an agent?
Well, sometimes they may mislead too, because they don't really know what
they
they're
don't know.
signing. Because
That's
they're like,
right.
did you sign? I don't know. Well, I don't know, but as soon as you said, we sent an offer, but we didn't get it, I was like, okay, definitely you
Yeah,
signed.
if they sent an offer, they probably signed it. But I've sat in on those too, where they said, yes, we did an offer, but it was through DocuSign, and we didn't stop and look at anything. They never explained this document to us, so in our mind, we knew we had written an offer, but we didn't know we had signed this.
And I feel so sorry for them.
Yeah.
Aren't there copies that they should have in their hands too? I mean, shouldn't
You
an
should,
agent
yes.
always give copies
Yep.
of anything signed to both
Yep.
parties, right?
But you could make the argument that I had them do it in .loop, so they have access to the
I mean, you
copy.
can still print that out.
You can, but what I'm saying is you could technically, that you gave, by you sending it to them, they now have a copy when they signed
They
it.
have access to it.
Yeah, they have access to it.
So
So
Russ, what is the document that you need? It used to be one, I haven't seen that for a long time, about either you leased or you have a broker agreement to have the agent, I don't want to work with you. There's another, is it withdrawal or cancellation?
I
What is
don't
it called?
remember. I don't remember. I don't know if there
That
is.
doesn't
actually.
owe you any money.
Yeah,
and
I
you
don't-
own any commission.
I haven't seen it for a while. I don't
Long
know.
time, yeah.
So-
Used to be.
Okay, we've spent an hour and we're only on section 2. I better get going. All right.
Okay.
That's why I'm like, I got 2 sites, but it's more fun to talk about that kind of stuff than what the rest of this is.
It has been.
All right, did I answer all the questions? Did anybody, Nicole had one, let's see. If I could clarify, the last line of section 2 means, does the buyer have to pay commission even if they default? Let me see what that says.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, the buyer and the company, the brokerage fee shown above shall be due and payable on, if purchase stated, recording of the closing documents of the lease, the effective date, or if an option, the date signed, the agreeable. If the transaction is prevented by default of the buyer, the compensation shall be immediately payable to the company. Oh, yeah. Okay, so then you're asking, does that mean even if they default? So basically what that last sentence there where it says if the transaction is prevented by default of the buyer. So both ultimately what it would be saying is we did everything all along the way and just we get to closing and the buyer just were to say, I'm just not signing. Then what that says is they would owe us the commission because we still did all the work. So yeah, that is what it says. All right, let's see. You could ask if you talk to their agent. referral fee. Yeah, Parker's saying you could ask if you could talk to their agent and maybe give the agent a referral fee or the cut of commission. Yeah, you could do that as well. Good. All right, next. Section 3, protection period. Some of this stuff that is the same as the listing, we're going to kind of just skip over. But protection period, we already had a discussion about that. I would put something in there. So whatever you decide, 1, 2, 3, 6, something like that. Yeah. Buyer representations and disclosures. That section is the buyer is war. Now here, I am going to read part of this one because this one I think is interesting because we are trained and taught we should be asking them, are you working with an agent? But notice what this says. The buyer warrants that the buyer has not entered into any other exclusive agreement, exclusive buyer broker agreement with any other brokerage that is still in force and effect. And then here's this. The buyer will, in all communications with other agents, notify the agents in advance that the buyer has entered into this exclusive buyer broker agreement with the company. So here's the thing. When they sign this, this actually puts them to be responsible to, like that buyer at Chick-fil-A talking to you, technically, according to this, if they started into a conversation, they are agreeing, they'll tell you, oh, I've signed a buyer broker agreement. They should tell us. Now, no agent ever points that out to them to tell them, but I think you should. So for me, here's my recommendation to you. When you get to this section of the contract, when you get to the buyer representation part, I would recommend that you pull out a stack of business cards and give it to the buyer and say, these are for you when you, if you come in contact with another agent, you see a model home that you want to go into, you see an open house that you want to stop into, hand the agents that are there my card and tell them you signed this. That, and I always present it to the buyer as that way they'll leave you alone. Because if you walk into an open house and go, this is my agent that I'm working with, I've signed a buyer broker, if you have any questions, call them. The agent's going to more likely than not be like, okay, feel free to look around. So I like to point that out.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Next, section 5 is agencies or agency relationships. So I told you we were going to hit the fiduciary duties today. I'm probably, because of how much time I've taken, I'm probably going to wait and we'll do it as part of the laws class because that's where it's at. We covered there too. So just know we're going to cover that next Thursday in the laws class, which, by the way, the Thursday class, as many of you guys as you can be here in person. I know we got some from St. George on here, so, but it would be worth the drive up. All right, maybe not, but I would come, I want to get as many people here in person next Thursday as we can. Obviously, wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, all that kind of stuff. But, yeah, and let's hope it doesn't snow.
I'll be here.
But me too. So because we're going to play Jeopardy. So even though the laws class maybe sounds like, oh, it's going to be fun because we do it as a Jeopardy game. So
come on, guys, get out of your beds.
turn off Days of Our Lives. And
change your pajamas and be here.
All right. So section 5 is about the agency relationship that we have that we're going to be working for them. All right. Next page. Oh, and I forgot. You guys might have to remind me to scroll up on this. 5.2 talks about the duties of a limited agent, which we'll talk about that in the laws one as well. So I'm going to skip it for now. 6, professional advice. Here's how I handle this. When I get to this section with the buyer, I always say this to them. What this section says to you is don't trust anything I tell you. That's how I like to explain it to them. And then they usually will be like, what? And so from there, then I explain. Basically, this says I'm trained in the marketing of real estate. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a property inspector. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a plumber. Don't rely on, I'm not a surveyor. Don't rely on anything that, and I'll tell them, you're going to want to ask me questions. Where's the property line? Well, I'm not a surveyor, so I don't really know. I could guess, but don't rely on me is what this section says. Now, the reason I always say that, the reason I always start it by saying this section says, don't trust anything I tell you. And then they, they'll laugh or whatever, like we did. But then when you get out to a property though, and they're going to say to you, hey, so Swin, where's the property line on this? And
I don't know.
Well, my answer is always, I can go look and see where the pin is, but remember that section I said, don't trust anything I tell you? This is what that's referring to, is don't rely on, if I go tell you, here's where the pin is in the curb, that doesn't mean I'm right. Okay, so I use it so that when we're in a property and they go, well, do you think this electrical is fine on this? Remember, don't trust anything I tell you, but it looks great to me. Yeah, exactly. Light turns on and off, so it must be good. I don't know. All right, so that's professional advice, is basically don't trust anything and usually what I'll do when I get to this section is I'll turn to the next form we're gonna do, which is the buyer due diligence, which we're not gonna do right now. But, all right. Section 7 is, as I'm with the client, I will just explain to them, dispute resolution just says, if we have a dispute between them and us as the brokerage, that we will go to mediation first. Section 8 says in the event that doesn't work and we end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. Okay. 9 is, just interrupt me if you guys have anything. Section 9 is buyer authorizations. It says the buyer authorizes the company to disclose after closing to each MLS in which the company participates the final terms and sales price of the property. Why do we need that permission?
Might be private to them. They don't want anybody to know.
Because Utah's a non-disclosure state.
Perfect, because Utah is a non-disclosure state, so the only way we can put it on the MLS is with permission. Okay. All right. So that's section 9. You're going to have an initial. Section 10. Section 10 is where we would do any attachments or an addendum to this. So there either are or there are not attachments. Most of the time there are not, but just if for some reason, like we said earlier, they didn't want to sign this, but they were willing to sign it for the 5 properties you were going to show them. You can check the R box there, get an addendum to this, and list the properties on it. Section 11 is equal housing opportunity. This one just says we're going to follow all the fair housing laws, basically. Okay, we're going to follow all the federal, state, and local laws regarding fair housing. Section 12 is we're agreeing we could do electronic transmissions and counterparts. Basically, we could use .loop. We could fax if we decided to do something that way. That's what this is saying, okay? Section 13 is due on sale. When would this apply? When would a due on, well, first, let me just say the due on sale clause in here really is only going to be an issue for your buyer in a couple of scenarios. What could be the potential scenarios that the buyer would care or need to know about a due on sale clause? Good. Yeah, is seller finance. If they were going to go buy a home using seller finance, which here's the thing, guys, I will not be surprised if down the road from now, we don't end up doing a lot more seller finance. Think about how many people today have interest rates that are under 3%.
These 2.5% loans would be valuable.
Those 2.5% loans, very likely down the road, as our interest rates start to go up, that's what we're as agents going to start to do, is be like, okay, we're going to advertise and we're going to have people come over and do a seller finance on taking over these loans, because maybe interest rates are 4 or 5% now. Who knows? So anyway, that's where this due on sale clause would come into play, as a buyer needs to know if they were to do a seller finance and they're wrapping or doing a wrap or something, that they run the risk that this lender finds out about it and calls the note due and payable, which if interest rates are 5 or 6%, I mean, hopefully they don't go there in the rest of my career, but if they did, then, which is funny to say, because there was a time when I was like 5%, that's amazing. So anyway, that's the idea of this due on sale clause. So if they're just doing a normal traditional purchase, really the due on sale clause is not going to really impact them at all, okay? The other potential option would be a lease option, if they were going to do a lease option on the property. So seller finance or lease option. All right, section 14 says this is the entire agreement, that there's not anything else that we've agreed to. So if you had advertised buy a house with me and I'll send you on a trip to Hawaii, and we don't put it in the agreement here, section 14 says you don't have to give them the trip to Hawaii. I'm not recommending that you advertise that, by the way. But. All right. Section 15 is the effective date, is just saying that is the effective date of this contract is effective the date that we're signing the agreement. And
Scroll up, please.
Scroll up.
oh, thank you. All right, then they're gonna sign, you're gonna sign, and before we move on, I just always like to point this out. Don't forget to ask if they have any other needs out of our market that you can either help them in terms of a property to sell or something to buy, okay? All right, next, buyer due diligence. Okay, we talked about, I think, anyway, I might not have said this last week. So if I didn't, I'll say it now. The seller disclosures that the seller fills out on the seller packet, I always tell the seller that's their get out of jail free card. Is when they fill out those seller disclosures, if on a transaction a seller ended up in court, it is a very high probability that it's going to be over something that is in the seller disclosures. And so I always tell the sellers when they're filling out the seller disclosures, anything you have disclosed on those seller disclosures essentially sets you free from being sued. See, a lot of times sellers will think about it as, well, I don't want to make my house look bad. Well, you're better off to say, we had a leak in the roof and we fixed it. Because then if there's another leak in the roof and they tried to come back and say, you didn't disclose that you had that, you could end up in court and have potential issues. But if you've done it, a judge is going to look at it and say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, did you not go check out the property? Because they told you there had been a leak. You should have gone and looked at it more detailed. So I've only had one time in my career, I've had one transaction that ended up in small claims court. And it was over something that in the seller disclosures was disclosed. And so when we went to court, which actually, these are more fun than what the contract is, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you the story. So what had happened is the lady had sold her home and moved to Indiana, if I remember right. So she sold her house, she moved to Indiana. She's been there for a couple of years. She calls me one day and says, hey, Russ, this is so-and-so. Do you remember me? And I was like, yeah, how you doing? What's going on? And thinking that she's going to say she's moving back to Utah and wants help. But she says, I got served notice that I have to be in court next week because the buyer is suing me because some tree root branches had grown into the sewer, and they're saying that we didn't disclose to them that there had been water in the basement. And she said, but I know we told them. And so I said, all right, well, how much are they suing you for? And it was like $1,100 or $1,200. And I said, okay. And she said, well, like, what do I do? And I said, well, did you disclose that in the seller disclosures? And she said, yeah, I know I had put in there we had water in the basement. And I said, well, then you're good. I'll go get a copy of the seller disclosures. And when you go to court, you can just take those and give them to the judge and show them that we disclosed. And I said, how much are they suing you for? And it was $1,100 or $1,200. And I said, well, how much is your airfare going to be? Because this was like on a Thursday and she had to be in small claims court on Monday or something. And her airfare was almost exactly what they were suing her for. And I said, why not just give them the money? Like, don't spend it to fly out here. Just give them the money. And she said, nope, I'm flying out there. Okay. So yeah. So she jumped on, she spent the amount of money, jumped on a plane, flew out here. We went to, it was in West Valley that we went to small claims court. We walked into there, which the small claims courts are just, they're not really judges. They're just attorneys that are pretending to be judges, basically. So we go to small claims court, we walk in, and luckily we had a good one that knew real estate and that actually had lived in a neighborhood that they had issues with tree root branches. But anyway, we get there, and he says to the buyers, what are we here for? Well, because tree root branches grew into the sewer line, which caused it to back up. And we noticed after we moved in, there was the basement wasn't finished, but it had some studs in there. And they said, we noticed on the studs in the basement, there was a water line. And they never told us that there had been water in the basement. So we had to go get that fixed and we want them to pay for it. So the judge then turns to the seller and says, what do you have to say? And I had printed out copies of the seller disclosures and handed it to her and told her, go tell the judge. Right here, I disclosed it to him. Here's their initials. They signed on the page. She walked it up, handed it to him. He looked at it. He said, looks to me like they disclosed it to you. And they said, yeah, but the tree root branches grew into the sewer. And the judge said, that happens to somebody in my neighborhood every year. Every year that happens to somebody. Welcome to home ownership. And then he said, case dismissed. And we left. So now with that, we're now on buyer due diligence. So think about those seller disclosures for the seller or the get out of jail free card. This buyer due diligence checklist is ours as an agent's get out of jail free card. Remember I said in section 9, I always tell them that I don't trust anything I tell you. And then I will turn to the or the buyer due diligence checklist. And I go through this with them and I point out to them this right here, that it says that we're trained in the marketing of real estate and that they should not, and then it's in all caps here, buyer is advised not to rely on the company or the agents of the company for a determination regarding the physical or legal condition of the property. And then it gives them an idea of here's some of the things you might want to consider checking out. So for me, this is where we're just telling them, these are the type of things that you, if you're worried about it, you should go check on these things. And then we're going to have them and sign it here that we've explained it to them. Now, the next form is the receipt and acknowledgement of buyer due diligence. This one is a company specific form for us. And what we do on this one is that the company, we know, I already told you guys that I've sat on hearings at the board where what has happened is somebody will come in and they'll say, well, I didn't know that I signed that because it was in .loop or DocuSign and I just clicked buttons. Well, so as an extra layer of protection at Everest, we have added this additional form. And this one is basically a receipt and acknowledgement of that buyer due diligence. So this one's just an extra layer of protection for you, that in the event somebody did try to sue you saying that you told them whatever, we would pull out the buyer due diligence to say, we had them sign this saying, don't trust us. But then we also would be able to throw this out to a judge saying, we also had them initial here that we told them that they should do a home inspection, that they could get a home warranty, a mold inspection, a radon and gas, the stucco, meth, termite, others. So this is just an extra layer of protection for you. And here's the other thing. This is how I would recommend you use it. And Sven left after he asked the question of about should we have all of these signed. So I would say this buyer due diligence would be a good one to have signed initially as well. But then you'll notice on the receipt and acknowledgement of due diligence down at the bottom here, it's got a spot for the property address and the MLS number. So to some extent, I would say you want to use that one for each property that you write an offer on.
Is
So
this something new?
the property address?
No,
Huh?
the MLS.
Oh,
I didn't see that before.
it might be, I don't know.
It's perfect.
But here's the thing, is this gives you basically just even an extra layer of protection on top of it that you could say, I had them sign this initially, and then when we wrote the offer, I reminded them.
Yeah.
And I did it for every property that we wrote an offer on. Okay.
So you would include this when you're doing an offer.
Yeah, I wouldn't send this to the seller, but yes, I would
Sign
include it for the, yep, I'd have the buyer sign it on every offer.
Could you
All right.
also wait until you're
I will
actually
tell
under
this.
contract on a property?
Say that again.
Could you wait until you've written an offer and you're under contract on the property and then
Yeah.
send them all the buyer due diligence and receipt and acknowledgement forms?
Yeah, I would just make sure I do it before the due diligence deadline for sure, but yeah, that would work.
I will tell my buyer too that you're welcome to have all these inspections, but just remember you need to pay for it.
Yeah, you have to pay for it. Okay, next here. The next one is the confirmation of earnest money receipt. So this form is what we're gonna use as, once we get the earnest money from the buyer. So when they deliver it to you, you should sign this, filling out the form and signing it that you received the earnest money. So whoever receives the earnest money should fill this out, and then I would recommend sending this over to the other side, the seller's agent, letting them know, hey, we received the earnest money by the, within the, Rob spent an hour talking to you guys about the 4 and the 4. That this is where I would be saying, this is our proof that we did that, okay? All right. Next is the limited agency consent. Okay, when do we need to use this form?
When there's two agents for the same company are representing.
Good. So it's one of two times. So either, and let me scroll to the section that says it. So either if you are representing both the buyer and the seller, you need to do it,
That's right,
or
two agents.
if you have two agents, which is what Lourdes was saying, two agents within the same brokerage. So there are other Century 21s across the Wasatch Front. There's only a couple of others, but there are a couple of other Century 21 franchises that are not Everest. Would I need to use this if I did a transaction with them? No.
No.
Only if it's Everest. Good.
Who is signing now this form on these days?
Who signs it?
Yeah.
Oh, good question. So as far as the signing right here where it says authorized agent or broker, either of, if there are two agents within our brokerage, either one can sign it. Just one of them has to, but either one can.
That one doesn't need to be signed by Matt?
Nope.
No?
The only time, so what Lourdes is asking is, you'll notice right where my pointer is here, it shows signature of authorized agent or broker. There will be some forms like I think the price change one, when you're doing an addendum to the listing agreement. Not, so I shouldn't say
Oh,
price.
expiration.
Yeah, some of those ones will say principal broker.
Oh,
So if it
principal.
says principal broker,
Okay.
then Matt Barton has to sign it. If it just says authorized agent or broker, then you can sign it.
Because I have a deal with another agent here and he said, I need to send it to Matt. And I was like,
No,
I don't know why he said
Nope.
that.
only if it says principal, if the form says principal broker in parentheses, Matt needs to sign
So
it.
I can sign it too,
Yep.
right?
If it
Okay.
doesn't, you can
Oh,
sign
no
it.
big deal. Okay, good, good.
Yep.
I'll let you know.
All
We
right.
don't do those that often, so
Right.
sometimes you can remember.
Yep. Next, wire fraud alert disclosure. So here's the idea of this one is make sure that you are communicating with your buyers that when they go, and I would almost say to approach it this way with them. When you go under contract on a property, you're going to get a solicitation saying we've changed the routing, and they may not, but to some extent, I want to tell them, plan on you're going to get somebody that tries to trick you to wire the funds to the wrong spot. So this form is just telling them, don't trust anything that comes via email about that, and verify. So I always tell them, I will give you the phone number for the title company that you're going to send the wire to. You need to call that phone number to verify before you send the wire. Just make sure. We had one agent that is no longer with our company when this happened, but she had been an agent at our company, but she also did flips. She would buy properties, fix them up and sell them. She left our company, went somewhere else, but then was buying a property from somebody in our company here. And she got one of these notifications, hey, the wire instructions have changed. Here's where you need to. She wired $150,000 to the wrong wire. But luckily, the title company, I mean, typically once you send a wire, it's gone. Luckily, they caught it fast enough that they were able to call and get the bank. She had to pay the wire fee still, but they were able to get it reversed. But only because they were within a few minutes of when it happened
Oh my
that they were able to stop it. So like, just kind of know this is a legit issue that's happening, and your client needs to be very, very careful that they make sure they're wiring, they know where they're sending the wire to.
How do
So
they know? How do they know you have under contract? Who is the ones they're trying to make you?
oh, how did these scammers
Yeah,
figure it
the
out?
servers.
Yes, they're basically anything you send on the internet as it's being transmitted from one to the other, if it's not encrypted, which a lot of times just our emails are not, anybody can grab that. It's just floating around out there. And so they will go do searches, and I'm not the expert of how this all works, but I'll give you the basics. is they basically just go data mine to find to do some keyword things that they find that you sent to your buyer. Here's our contract. And then from there, they can take that and they will then create an email that looks like it's coming from you to your buyer that says, hey, just want to let you know the wire instructions have changed. Here's the, and in fact, the most recent one that I saw, I should have kept a copy of it for the class. The most recent one that I saw, actually on the bottom of the email even said, be careful of wire fraud. Call this phone number to verify that this is not wire, that you have the right wire instructions. And then if you called the phone number, it wasn't the title company, it was the scammers, and they would answer it as if they were the, like these guys are not stupid to do this stuff.
So do title companies have specific agents that are helping on specific projects or specific files? So you could not only give the number to the person, but also who they should be talking with?
Yeah.
Just to make it a little bit more safe.
Yep. But again, I would say make sure that they need to make sure, like, you don't need to be to this extreme, but I almost present it to the buyers this way of like, get in your car and drive to the title company and talk to them face to face to verify. Like, I mean, we don't need to be that extreme, but you almost want to be that extreme, because if you wire off 150,000, like, here's the thing, if your client wires off $150,000 to the wrong place, they're probably not buying that house anymore, which means you're not getting paid a commission anymore either. So just kind of.
Russ, I actually heard of one that was like $1.9 million. It was a cash purchase.
Wow.
And that happened in Salt Lake Valley. That happened within our board. Yep.
Wow. Like, could you imagine? Like, that's just, you wouldn't get your commission check. No, I'm just kidding. But could you imagine how you would feel as the, that's
well,
horrible.
and as an agent, the buyer may even try to sue you.
Oh.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. But that's why, luckily, if you had them sign this where you said, I warned you not to do that. So
all my buyers, they do the wiring in front of the face of the escrow officer.
Yeah.
That's all.
I just tell my clients, just take cash to closing. I'm just kidding. Joking. Yeah, briefcases full of money. Handcuffs.
Save money on the side.
Yeah. All right. And I still haven't updated this form. I just realized. So don't use this packet. Make sure you use the one on .loop. But the affiliated business disclosure. So this one again is just to disclose that we have a sister relationship with Inspiro, and then the updated form also has North Star Title, and that we're disclosing that relationship. They don't have to use them, even though we would recommend it. They do. All right. And then the last form here is, again, the disclosure and acknowledgement regarding lead-based paint. So on this, we talked about the seller side of it last week. So on the buyer side, on this, you're going to fill it out, put in the address of the property. And then the seller is going to, well, first, actually, the buyer needs to have read this lead warning. Then the seller will fill out section 2, which we talked about last week. So on section 3, the buyer is going to initial that they've received any of the information in 2A or 2B. They're also going to initial that you have given them the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home, so that's on .loop. Make sure you share that with your client. And then they're going to initial that you gave them that, which basically just says, don't eat lead paint. As long as you don't eat it, you're good. Then section 3, which I guess I shouldn't necessarily say as long as you don't eat it, because if you ingest it somehow, I guess. Section 3 here is they're going to initial that they have read the lead warning up above here in section 1. And then they're going to initial either this box or this one. So if they initial this one, they're saying they are going to test for lead-based paint. You therefore need the addendum as well. If they initial this one, they're saying they're waiving the right to test for lead-based paint. So there's not a right answer. If they want to test, they should test. But just keep in mind, if you initial here, this box, you also need the lead-based paint addendum. So this one is the, oops, I went too far here. This one is the disclosure, which that one is required on properties built prior to 1978. but the addendum is only used if you checked or initialed this box. If they initialed that box, you need it. Sometimes what will happen is agents will have their clients initial both of these, in which case the office is gonna say, we need the addendum.
So let's say they initial it as you're filling this out on Dotted, okay?
Yep.
Does it kick back to us? You also, like, if that says it needs an addendum, because we don't automatically send that, right?
Right.
So will it automatically alert us to then send them the lead base?
So if you have initialed this box when you submit the form to the office, the transaction coordinators are gonna notice it, and then they're gonna tell you, you need to get
You
this.
need that one too.
Yep. And then everybody gets to sign this one, so the buyers would sign here, and then you and the other agent end up signing down here.
So Russ says prior to 1978, so if I have a house 1978, I don't need
If
it.
it was built in 78, you do not need this. Yep. All right, last then is on here is, which this is probably the most important that you'll
The
care
most
about,
important.
is the commission report. So this, you have to fill this out in order to get paid. So even if you got all your other paperwork done correctly, this is the one you're gonna fill out to get paid. So I'm just gonna run through how to fill it out real quick. You'll put in the address of the property here, the buyer's name, the seller's name, the title company you're using, and then the transaction type, this box. So you'll fill this out as an Excel spreadsheet. And when you click on this box, it'll give you a drop down. So if it was not, the default is residential buying, because that's typically what's gonna be, is that it's a residential
Or a
transaction.
listing,
Or, yeah, a residential listing. But if it was a commercial or something, you could change it there as well. Then you're gonna put down here the closing sales price. So what was the purchase price of the property that they bought or sold? Is the commission based off gross or net, which you'll look at the MLS to see is it gross or net. And the difference is net would be, it's gonna calculate the commissions. Let's say it was a $300,000 purchase price with $5,000 in closing costs towards the buyer, then it's gonna calculate the commissions at $295, not at $300. So that's the difference, okay? So is it gross or net? And then how much is being paid? You know, what's the commission? If it was 3.5, change it to 3.5. Do we owe a referral fee on it? So the default is none, but if there is one, you would click on the box and change it to yes, and then it would open up another box over here that you could then fill out who the referral fee is going to. If there was a commission advance paid on it, you would change that, but that's pretty rare. Next is going to be down here, the C21 admin fee collected. So now notice that it's got it defaulted at $295 there, but when we went through this buyer broker form, I had $495. So if I had collected $495, I would change this from $295 to be $495. If you didn't collect it, you would change it to 0, in which case then you get to pay it. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a sec. How much of the earnest money is being held at Century 21? You're going to put in there how much, if we are holding the earnest money, how much it was. Did you give any credits at title? So did you pay $500 for some reason? You would put it in here. So, and then the amount of the check that we get should match what this says right here. Okay. Next, is it a single agent or are you on a team? If you're just a single agent, you're just going to type your name in the box right here. If you're on a team, you'll click this and switch it to team, in which case it'll open up a box over here for you to put in the team leader's information. Your name though will go here, and then down here it shows the admin fee. So if up above you had not collected it here, it's going to subtract it here, which means you pay it. So either way, it's going to subtract it here, but it's actually subtracting what they paid if you put in $295 here. If you put in $495, it's going to subtract $295 of the $495 from that.
I have a question here, I just
Okay.
have a doubt. When it says the Century 21 administration fee collected, so if you put $595, Century 21 will keep the $295, whatever it goes towards the balance.
Yep, so if you did a $595, the
300 there.
$295 goes to the company, the other $300 it goes on your split. Yep.
Automatically.
So then from there, it gives you what the base is now, this 9,000. Then from that, whatever split you're on, you'll put in here. So if you were on, in this case, a 70-30, you put the 30 in here. So you get to keep 70. So you're putting in the percentage that goes to the company here. So whatever that is, if you're on a 50-50, you would put 50 in. Okay. Then from there, it's going to calculate the franchise fee that goes to Century 21 and deduct it. It'll deduct if you paid the admin fee. So in this case, it shows 0 because we had it up here. If this said 0, this would be changed down here to say $295. Okay. If you're paying towards the foundation, so we have a nonprofit set up that agents can donate to, and then our foundation will donate that money to just various different things, road home or different things like that. Okay. And if you want to contribute money to that, you would put in the default on here is $21. You can change it to whatever you want. If you used a transaction coordinator, then you would put in the fee for the transaction coordinator there and type in their name. If you're not using a transaction coordinator, you're just doing it yourself, then it would just leave it as 0 and no name. So if you're using a TC, but here's the thing, if you're filling out, if you are using a transaction coordinator, they're going to fill out this form. So you don't even have to fill it out. So that's the advantage to using a transaction coordinator is you don't fill it out. And then this will show what your check amount should be. And do you want it to be direct deposit, yes or no? If you've given the company the information to do a direct deposit, you just change it to yes. If you want them to cut you a check, change it to no. So, which I would recommend putting it to yes, because how it is right now, our accounting department is working from home still. So if you want an actual check, it's delayed a couple of days because they only come in every so many days, and or they just mail it to your house, I think actually now. So you're going to have, I think that's what it is. They're just mailing it to your house. So it doesn't show up for a few days.
2, sometimes 3 days.
Yeah. So 2 or 3 days longer to get paid. If you just put yes, you'll get paid 2 or 3 days faster. So. All right.
That's good.
That is the end. Woo! All right.
The last 5 documents in 30 minutes.
I know. I went fast.
First three paragraphs are like,
I know. So that's because that was the important stuff. So next Tuesday will be the REPC workshop class. So this is going to be me doing that one. And what I'll do is I'm going to give you guys a REPC. So when I send the email on Monday, if I forget to attach it to you guys that are on Zoom, reply to my email and say you forgot to attach the REPC. So that way you guys have it and can print it out beforehand. But if you're here in person, I'll just give you one. So that we'll do that on Tuesday, and then Thursday will be the Jeopardy class. So I want to encourage, again, if you don't feel safe, you're worried, don't come, but I want to get as many people here as we can get here, and because it's a lot more fun if you're in person, I promise. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for being here.
thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick question for you.
And for you guys online, before you jump off, if you didn't put your name in, make sure you do. And I forgot to have you put stuff in throughout. But the good news is I'll go and see when you logged on. So anyway, make sure you put your name in there if you did. See you guys later. All right, go ahead.
Just a side note question.